Welcome back to Operator Syndrome. I'm Patrick. This is Steve, and we're going to go a third episode talking about the book Code Over Country and just kind of in general topics related to it. Steve, you had something you wanted to bring up. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we're trying to try to peel back why it is that that our elite fighters get into these compromised kind of positions where they're as guilty of some of the atrocities as the enemy is. That's troubling to me because I care about my former community and care about the larger American military in general. That we have standards, that we maintain humanitarian values as a whole, and nobody in my humble universe, nobody's um, above those rules. It applies to all of us, from the commander in chief on down to the most junior private. And if we ever break from that, then we're really in trouble, because then it's just we've lost our moral bearing, our compass, whatever you want to call it, and anything goes. And what applies to me ought to apply to everybody up the chain of command. I don't care how high it goes. I don't care how much money somebody has or how cool they are. It's personal. It gets personal. And so I thought I would start off by identifying one of the things that's come out of this book, Code Over Country. Very well-researched book. Like I said in previous podcasts, it's heartbreaking for me because I see some of my community doing stuff that I just wish didn't have to happen. But I'd like to start off by quoting a war movie that I love, Apocalypse Now. And I think there if you listen to the dialogue of Martin Sheen, who is this captain, special forces captain, that's going up this river to basically assassinate or eliminate one of our own, a Green Beret who's gone off the rails, Marlon Brando, Colonel Kurtz. His dialogue on that river is profound at times. And so one of the statements he makes as he's reading the dossier, going up the river to realize he's going to have to try to assassinate one of our own. And he says this: charging a man with murder in Vietnam is like writing speeding tickets at the Indy 500. And I thought, man, that opens up a world of the difficulty of insurgencies, right? And one of the problems I've identified, both in numerous sources now, not just Code Over Country, is that one of the problems with fighting an insurgent war is that two things primarily. Number one, that civilians and fighters can't always be distinguished. They're not necessarily wearing, and hardly ever are wearing, unit identifying patches. They're not wearing traditional, uniforms where okay, you're now in Vietnam. It wasn't quite as, you had the North Vietnamese Army, the NVAs, and they were wearing North Vietnamese Army uniforms most of the time. But then you had the Viet Cong, which were insurgents in South Vietnam who were fighting. And so, just talking to my buddy Mike, he shot. They were clearing a hooch one time. They were searching for a target, and all he sees is a black flash run. Like the hooches, he said, were made of this thatch, and you could literally run through a wall. And he saw a black, a lot of times the Viet Cong wore just black clothing. He saw a figure with a weapon run right through this wall, and he had a stoner. It's kind of like our modern saw weapons, the squad automatic weapons, and he turned and just let it rip. And he got outside. Actually, after they secured the hooch, he got outside, and it was a female carrying an AK-47, and she was clearly a combatant. And he said, man, that wore on him for years. It just messed with his head. He's like this beautiful Vietnamese girl just laying there. And but so you get into this whole thing where to distinguish one of the problems is to distinguish a civilian from a fighter, and then secondly, the, at least ISIS fighters, Al Qaeda fighters that I've heard about, I didn't directly engage any of these fighters. They don't play by the rules of armed conflict, like the rules of engagement that we all have to play by. All all the forces that are NATO forces and Geneva Convention subscribing forces. So they can do anything they want, and no matter how brutal, ugly, target civilians, mutilate bodies, and so this leads to another problem where it gets really personal. And with Neil Roberts, who was a dev group operator who fell out of a helo, it was a bad situation. They got shot by an RPG and landed on a mountaintop. Um, they realized that the fighters that killed Roberts were trying to behead him. They didn't actually do it. Whether the knife was dull, I don't know. It's harder than you think to cut off a human head. But anyway, it didn't happen. But he was mutilated to a degree, and that led to such just absolute base anger, and rightly so. And here's where I get into the empathy side. I understand that my brother, who's going to have my back, if I see what I think is a barbaric treatment, I want to just say, all right, two can play at that game. You want to be barbaric? We'll just up the ante. We'll show you barbarianism. Okay, so in the book, here I just want to read a couple quotes and then I'll kick it to Patrick to see if he has follow-ups. But so from the book, it says one of the former SEAL Team 6 leaders who investigated several squadron incidents, including the mutilation of bodies, said he repeatedly asked the operators why they felt the need to commit such acts. Often we'd hear, well, they're savages. The former non-commissioned officer said, they don't play by the rules. Why should we? So I guess that's my leading question. So why should we? And in my humble opinion, that the answer to that is because a counter question would be, what separates us from the savages? If we start playing by those same rules without with abandon, like no concern, then why are they bad, and what makes us good? And when I say bad and good, I'm not using that as a dualistic category to say we're better on a human level. I'm just saying our actions are what have to be better than others. So that's a big one. And I think that's a really complicated one, honestly, because it's easy for us to sit back in our comfortable homes and go, yeah, those guys, man, they're really going over the line. But man, they're dealing with some serious stress, the likes of which I will not know. So I kind of feel bad almost, having to bring up these concerns because yeah.
Uh, I I think you're right to be concerned. I think that I mean, and this was a lot of the controversy around Chief Gallagher, right? It
Yeah.
was a lot of the folks, 99% of them who weren't there at all, but rushing to his defense was said that said exactly that. Like, well, that's how the enemy fights, so why should we do any different? Why should we constrain how our boys can fight? And um, you know, again, I don't know Chief Gallagher. I only see what I read. and I've heard his story, when he's come out in some podcasts. So, um, but in general, in my opinion, when I came in after 9/11, the wars had been going on for a few years. It was 2005 when I enlisted, and for me, I think that part of it might also be the shock of it. So those folks who were on that mountain, or those folks who experienced those first few years of war, when we were often, as a society, shocked by the brutality of our enemy at the time. By the time I went in, I I I knew perfectly well that if I ever got captured, my head was coming off. Like
Hmm.
that wasn't in question. Surrendering, the idea of being able to surrender and
Yeah.
being, handcuffed and sent off to, a prisoner of war camp, a la The Great Escape, and to be able to pull hijinks, for the duration of the war, that was never an option for me.
Right.
Um, and and so, you know, I can honestly say, though, the idea of mutilating an enemy body has never come close to crossing my mind.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did 5 deployments, 3 to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq. I saw terrible things. It never once crossed my mind to mutilate a body.
Mhm.
Again, going back to the just to, like, when you're on target, when do you have time to meet? Like, there's nothing better you can be doing. Like, I always picture from the perspective of a leader. If one of my guys was mutilating, there's nothing better that guy can be doing. There's something that that person should be doing at that moment.
Right.
And even forget the how sick it would be, how sick the sickness, the mental illness that must come, the derangement that must come from wanting to mutilate a body for
Mhm.
sport.
Yeah.
Um, like, there's just the practical side of, what are you supposed to be doing right now? You should be searching this place. You should be pulling security. You should be, reinforcing. You should be doing something at that moment. And that's far that crosses a line that just doesn't make sense to me. And this excuse that, well, you got to let the seals eat, you got to let them off the chain, that's insane to me. Like, the seals can do that, the rangers can do that, the green berets can do that without needing to mutilate bodies.
Yeah.
That's just one of those things where there is no gray area to me. There's just no practical use. It doesn't scare the enemy, right?
Right.
Because the same folks who say, who might justify it as, well, we're trying to put the fear back into, they're used to it. That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
whole point,
Yeah.
right? Like, that those type of actions are common over
Yeah.
there. So it's really, for them, it's kind of just like table stakes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and to your point, you're sort of feeding back into, you're almost validating it for the enemy, like, okay, this is what we do. Oh yeah, now we got the Americans doing this. But that's that part. And
Yeah. That's right. Oh, sorry.
then the only other thing I was going to say was, um no, I can't remember. No, you go ahead.
It happens to me every 5 seconds. Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm a professor, is one of my day jobs, and my dissertation analysis was a study of fundamentalist cultures, religious fundamentalist cultures, and every world religion has those. It's not Nobody's got a lock on it. And one of the things I always found fascinating, feeding into my much repeated quip that all truth is paradox, is that the super fundamentalist, the super, like, uber, we are the saved, everybody else is going to hell. um they need atheists to support their cause. They need militant atheists to support their cause, because if they don't have the other to demonize, then they can't marshal any evidence. So they need some foaming at the mouth extreme opposite. But and so going back to what you're saying, yeah, it all the brutality usually backfires. When we try to play at their games, we only end up doing their bidding, but not affecting them at all. Like you say, they're 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 zealots. They're going to do this by
I I'm personally offended.
yeah,
I'm personally offended. I'm offended when people say things like, going back to, well, you got, oh, you got to let them do that. That's, like, what do you expect from, the Army Rangers are going to do that. They're tough. The SEALs are tough. They're going to. It's like, no, no.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's offensive that you're essentially saying that we are the same as the enemy.
yeah,
That we
yeah.
are no better. It's like, well, what do you expect? They're SEAL. They are trained to do that. Like, nobody is trained to cut off ears.
No,
Nobody is trained to attempt to sever a head. The point I wanted to make, though, was that, um, and again, this is not a special operations problem only. Uh, there were multiple conventional units that got in trouble for mutilating bodies, desecrating corpses. Um, I believe, I think it was, well, I don't know the exact unit, so I'm not just going to call out units, but there was an army unit, I think, that were collecting body parts, and I believe there was definitely a marine unit that was urinating on the corpses of of their enemy, and and I get, I c- I can understand where those feelings come from,
mhm,
and especially when you're talking about young guys.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, especially, it's at the heat of the moment, and you're upset, and you're angry,
yeah,
and and maybe these guys, hurt or killed, a buddy of yours, but that's where leadership is supposed to step in. That's where someone is supposed to have a clear-headed mind and stop those things, because um, we got to be better than that.
yeah,
And we can be. And it's not that hard to not urinate. Again, there's nothing better. Like, again, I think back, I'm a team. If I think back to those days as a team leader, it's like, there's nothing else better. If I see my guys starting to get riled up and they're like, hey, let's piss on these dudes we just killed, I'd be like, hey, you know what? Let's put a pin in that. Like, let's establish security because we just got in contact. Let's make sure that
right,
we're safe. Like, hey, can someone go through these dudes and see if we can get any intelligence? Like,
yeah,
there are things you can do, and tying back to the book, I think that's where, like, leadership is sorely lacking. That type of leadership, to understand, but to funnel those type of control and funnel those types of emotions into something more productive. That's not anything I see mentioned in that book. That seems something that's severely lacking.
yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping that Couch's book will get into that. He's going there, and I'm only in the first chapter. He's going to these essential leadership, both NCO level and junior to senior leadership issues. So I hope he's got something to say there, in days to come. But yeah, yeah, it's a really good point. Like, what in the hell, what are we? Yeah,
I mean, and the problem in Code Over Country is that it's the leadership that is not only enabling it, but they're participating in it. You
right,
know what I mean? And
right.
not to say that senior leadership's squeaky clean on the Army side, because that's definitely not true. But in these specific cases, because it's a book written about, the
Yeah.
SEAL teams, what is a glaring problem? And the author writes to make that point, which is that, um, the bad apples in leadership continue on in leadership, and they
Hmm.
continue to let that. So why would you expect it to get cleaned up? You
Right.
know, anywhere along the way.
One of the other big takeaways I had from this book, on page 175, he writes, violence creates its own parallel universe. And I thought that was really wise. I mean, he's just looking at how things play out. When I don't know if I told this story already on this podcast. I hope I haven't. Was in I was in second phase SEAL training, and a bunch of Vietnam SEALs came out to the beach to have a cookout, and they were drinking beers. And these are older SEALs, Vietnam era SEALs, and they were having a class reunion party. And we're there, field day in our rooms, getting ready for inspection, and it was a weekend, so I think it was a Saturday. And they're like, "Hey, you guys, come over here and help us." And we're like, "Who ya?" They looked like they knew what was going on, and they knew who we were. So we were like, we didn't ask questions. And they were these old. They were from SEAL class 49. We were 149. And one of the guys was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner, Mike Thornton. I mean, we read his citation on quarterdeck watch to try to stay awake many a long night. And he said, "Hey, help me grab this case of beer here." And they were just going to have grill steaks and have beers, whatever, have their reunion. And he reaches out his hand. He said, "Thanks, trainee, Mike Thornton. Nice to meet you." And I was like, "Mike Thornton? I'm the Mike Thornton?" I was like, I couldn't believe it. Well, there was this other guy, and so we helped them unload all their stuff. And so there was this other guy who was just really soft spoken, kind of, but he was one of the members of class 49. He motioned to me. He said, "Hey, how's it going? What's your name? Where?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm me, and I'm want to be a SEAL, and I'm second phase, and hoo yah." And he was a chaplain. He was a SEAL who had become a Navy chaplain. As far as I know, I've only known two people who were former SEALs who became chaplains. That guy, and I don't even know his name. I've got to try to find him.
Yeah, you do.
I really got to find him. And then myself, I came back as a chaplain, and I was the only chaplain, former SEAL chaplain in the Navy at the time. And I remember thinking back then, I'm like, why in the heck would you become a chaplain? I mean, you're a SEAL, dude. And he was like, "Well, you learn lessons in life, and not everything's like you see it when you're 19, 20 years old." And I remember him telling me something. He just it was just me and him. And I was like, "That's Mike Thornton over there. I just shook hands with Mike Thornton." And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I fought with Mike in Vietnam. He's a badass. Yep." He said, "But I just want to tell you something." And I don't know where Mike came into, but he said, "Be careful to preserve the goodness inside of you." He said, "Because I've seen guys get so into killing that they lost their own soul in the process." And I remember, man, I've never forgotten those words. And I thought, man, that's pretty heavy. I could tell. I mean, I wanted to be a SEAL worse than anything in the world, but he's like, "I'm telling you, watch it. Keep it in check. Keep your humanity, keep your soul, your spirituality, your goodness," basically is what he's saying. "Keep it in check, because you can go to a dark side where it's a world of hurt." So back, just circling back on that, violence creates its own parallel universe. And I think maybe my last thought on that line would be, we live in such a culture. We love our movies like, "Go ahead, make my day. I'll blow your head off," but you know yeah, that's kind of cool. It's kind of all right. Yeah, we're cool, we're badass, but we're still human beings, and we have to process that, and we have to live with that. And I don't think it's so good all the time, but I don't know.
I yeah, you know, I got a couple of thoughts. The first one I was thinking of was just how how much gray area there is in combat, for sure. Um, there are a lot of decisions made and things you have to do in the moment, and that that you can question for a long time. you know. Um, and and I've seen dudes who had to make some judgment calls that I'm pretty sure, sitting here to if they were sitting here, they probably regretted it. Um, and 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 that's the way war is. That's the way combat is. Um, most of it is gray, and so one thing I want to make sure we definitely don't do is discount. To say it's not just like the the battle between the enemy and us is not clear. Right, one is righteous and one is evil.
Right.
It's never that clear. It also goes to the decisions that you have to make, right? And and folks, you're definitely in the moment. When you're in the moment and you're working with the information you have, and and that's tough all by itself. But I'll again reiterate that you know cutting off things is well beyond is well beyond the gray area. There's absolutely no excuse for that, in my opinion. And then going back to killing creates, it was kind of interesting. Definitely in my time, the folks who probably end up getting the most kills, if you will, having to engage and eliminate the enemy the most often would have been folks from our sniper section, just because of the way we set up, right? So you're the sniper section folks are usually leading out when we set up on a target, on an objective. They're usually getting an advantageous position to be able to look in and observe, and they would be the first ones to see, walking in and around the objective area, any enemy. And I think this is not a TTP. It's pretty clear that whenever you go to action the objective, like, you're going to eliminate the threats that are available,
Right.
and the snipers are in the position to do that. And so I was always I was never a sniper. I was never in the sniper section. I was always surprised by those folks, or I always wondered what it was like to be them, you know, because like I said, 99 times out of 100, an assaulter is going into an objective, and then it's pretty quiet. It's fine. You're not taking contact. You grab the person you're looking for, and everything's all right. But those times when you do make contact, those snipers are usually in a position where they're taking those shots. They're taking most of them. Um, so I've met I met guys who had multiple multiple enemy KIA, to their name. Um, Confirmed kills not being a real thing, but like guys like
Right.
they'd had their fair share, and I always wondered how that weighed on them. I think
Hmm.
in those cases, it's more often. Now I can't say it. I don't know, so I'm not going to say it was more clear cut, but it's sort of a unique situation. They have magnified optics, and I think it's much more personal than on the end of a rifle, across the room. So, but yeah, other more folks who have to grapple with, to your point, in that case, even if they're good shoots, that's got to weigh on them to have so
Right.
many, right? But in on TV and books and everything, like, that's Chris Kyle's book was mentioned in Code Over Country. We as a society, we laud those with the high numbers. They killed
Right.
X amount of. But I don't know that I would want to be the person who bears that burden, and I don't know if I could, and I don't know what that does to you to know that. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So this is pretty weighty stuff that we're kind of digging into.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think just wrapping up the book, I want to finish with like kind of a summary statement. And Patrick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Maybe I'll throw in a couple says the most disciplined class of warriors, not just Team 6 and the Navy SEALs as a whole, but the larger special operations community, seem to be showing signs of an internal crisis, the effects of 2 decades of violence and war. The case also shined a spotlight on how broken, or just how broken, the SEALs were by 2017. And we've seen some of that. Patrick and I have looked at video footage of some really high level operators who are just, they're a wreck. I mean, they're just emotionally a wreck. Matthews, for instance, was a typical mid-career SEAL. By the time he was charged, he had served 15 years in the Navy, 8 combat deployments. His lawyers would later submit medical records showing a typical combination of physical and psychological afflictions. And this is going to get into operator syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, spinal compression, sleep disorder, hearing loss. And here we go with kind of, yeah, I'm trying to kind of bring it full circle into why we're calling this operator syndrome. Um, yeah, we're entering a new interesting phase of sort of life. We're pretty much out of the Middle East. We're out of Afghanistan, um, and now other dynamics are happening. But it's just like we've got 2 decades, basically a generation of soldiers and sailors who are really hurting, and so in future episodes, what we're going to have an eye toward is like, and I don't know where these are all going to come from. They're certainly not out of my own head, but reading papers, reading books, talking with one another in dialogue, and maybe even future special operators that we know, coming on. Who knows where it'll go, to just try to sort out. Okay, so we're all on the same side. I mean, that's my takeaway at the end of the day. How can we be better at limiting atrocities? How can we be healthier as a nation, and how can we help these guys who are hurting so bad to heal? Those are the questions there that kind of keep me up at night. But I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts on that, Patrick.
That sounds right to me. Um, a lot of folks have gone through a lot of things, um, have experienced moral injury for even things that they were clean on, and some folks probably did some things that they're not that hopefully they're not happy that they did. They regret them, and no matter who they are or what they've done, I think everyone hopes for peace for that person, that they
Yeah,
can find peace and that they're able to move on and and be productive and be happy
yeah,
because they sure went through a lot of stuff, and I think they deserve that.
yeah. I mean, they're heroes on one level. You can't take, never deprive, like you said, happiness is the goal. We just want to, have people content with themselves, not beating themselves up the rest of their life. There's a time for forgiveness. I mean, maybe that's where the spiritual angle comes in. You've got to be able to forgive yourself, um, before you can, feel whole again. And you know, maybe some biblical characters come into the fore. Moses murdered an Egyptian, and he was used by God. David killed thousands of people, and he was used by God. So it's not without hope that we can all be whole. And we're all just uh, walking bundles of contradiction, I always say, at the end of the day. So nobody's got a lock on being better than anybody else.
Absolutely not. And the first step is being honest with
Yeah.
yourself and with your team, with your country. So so we'll see what happens. Uh, that's gonna do it for this one. So I think this will wrap up our chat about code over country. So
Yeah.
we're gonna pick it back up in the next episode we do, with our story again. I think we just left basic training, so we'll start to get into the more SEAL and Ranger specific training, and then of course along the way tie it back to similar themes. So that's it for today. Thanks for checking out Operator Syndrome, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.